We're in 1 Samuel 25. So this is lesson 11. Last week we looked at chapter 24, an incident where... We all right up here?
This little thing. Apologize for the interruption.
No worries. So chapter 24, we had David and Saul ending up in the same cave where Saul had been chasing after David and did not know that they were both in the same cave. But David knew. He was a little bit farther back in and had opportunity to kill Saul. And all of his men wanted him to do that. But he didn't, because he did not see that it was his place or a good thing for him to kill the Lord's anointed. However, he did cut off the corner of Saul's robe, and this was something that initially was done kind of as an act of mercy, combined with a way of showing Saul, look how close I was to you. David came to regret that very shortly thereafter, and did not believe he should have even done that. But we had really an interesting interaction between the two of them, where David calls out to him from a distance, shows him the corner of the robe that he cut off, and says, look, I didn't want to kill you. I don't want to kill you. I don't have anything against you. We are not enemies. Can we not basically let this go? And we see some sanity out of Saul. We see even some love between the two of them. And Saul seems to understand that David is not his enemy, and admits for, I think, the first time in this, that he knows that David is going to be the next king. And so this is really kind of a breakthrough on Saul's part, although, again, it's not going to solve every problem that he has. Well, that brings us to chapter 25, and chapter 25 has an interesting place in all of this, because chapter 26 is going to give us another incident similar to 24. So those two have a lot to do with each other, and both of them David's going to show quite a bit of restraint. In chapter 25, the restraint goes out the window. In chapter 25, we see David almost making a huge mistake, and he is stopped only by Abigail, as we will see. But it's interesting to have this put between 24 and 26. I'm kind of answering question 3 for us. But basically, we need to see 25 as out of character compared to what 24 and 26 show. And that helps give us a more realistic perspective on David. One of the things we have to avoid doing with these people in the Bible is seeing them as flat, two-dimensional characters who only have, one character trait to them, right? David is good, so his character trait is good. He is faithful, and that's all that we can say about him. No, he's more complicated than that. Like you and I are more complicated than that. David was a man after God's own heart. David was God's anointed. He served God faithfully, but not every decision he made was a good one. And 25 is an example of that. So now that I have kind of answered question 3 for us, was there anything else you wanted to add to that about the irony of chapter 25 before we talk about what's actually happening in it? Yeah, Gary.
I just wanted to add one thing about the very end of 44.
Mm-hmm.
Because after that meeting, it says Saul went home, but David went back to the stronghold. In other words, did David still know or still feel, I think it's not really over because this is Saul. We can't trust him.
Yeah.
100%. It's like they still kept separated after this kind of close communication, right?
That's a good observation, because last time there was a problem when David was on the run briefly and Saul comes after him. Somehow when it got patched up, David went back to Saul's house, and he was there with him, and they were making another go at this. David doesn't do that this time. This is, they're able to patch things up to some degree, but David still does not trust Saul, and that's probably warranted by this point. So that's a good observation to see there. Okay?
Well, I was going to say, he
Yeah.
So he could, yeah, I guess he could kill somebody that was anointed, but he wasn't gonna kill, anointed.
Yeah, and that's going to be pretty interesting for this chapter, because maybe that comes into David's reasoning here. Well, Nabal's not God's anointed. If he has made me angry, then there's really no ramifications to killing him. That's probably not the best way for him to look at things, though, right? Like, generally, it's better if we try to avoid killing people. Even in the Old Testament, it was better to try to avoid killing people. So, yeah, David does react pretty differently. It's interesting to see 25 here compared to 24 and 26. Let's look at this story and see what's happening. 1 Samuel 25. The first thing we see, actually, before we have anything to do with Nabal and Abigail, is a single verse saying, "Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah." So, kind of interesting that for a book that is named after Samuel, it is mostly not about Samuel. And it does kind of start with him, but really this book has been more about Saul and David than it has been about Samuel, but that's fine. And Samuel really drops out of the story a lot after he is shunned by Saul and replaced by Saul. We just see him in a few isolated things where David goes to him for help, or Samuel pops up here and there. And now he has died. Israel mourns for him. And even though we didn't get a lot of information about the end of Samuel's life and those last years of his life, we need to appreciate the level of influence he had in this nation, the kind of spiritual leadership that he had to offer. He was good for Israel. He came at a time when the word of the Lord only came rarely in the nation. And in Samuel, it came abundantly. And overall, that was a good thing. It helped the people, and it guided them through even Saul's insanities. And as Saul is bringing the people away from God, Samuel has been a counterbalancing influence to him. So, interesting to see Samuel gone. This is not the last that we will read of Samuel, though. We'll get there. That's usually when people die, it is the last that we see of them, but not so much this time. Okay, so aside from that footnote, we have Nabal and Abigail next. So David is going down into the wilderness of Paran. He is out in basically this desert territory, still kind of on the outskirts of things, not able to really go into Israel, into the main part. Still fears, evidently, that Saul is going to try to kill him, or that David's not going to have a whole lot of support there in the nation. And he ends up in an area of land that is controlled by a man named Nabal. And this man is a man whose business was in Carmel. It says he was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And here in this kind of wilderness territory, you know, a lot of times the concept of exact land ownership wasn't very solid back in those days. And so it was the influence of a wealthy man who was able to have flocks and herds out there, who was able to employ a bunch of servants and shepherds and people. This is basically what we saw out of Abraham. Abraham was probably a little more nomadic than Nabal was. And this may have been more formally Nabal's land. It's a little hard to tell. But either way, out in this wilderness territory, this large swath of land is controlled by a wealthy man who has lots of animals, lots of people who work for him and work under him, and he's been very successful for himself. Okay. So we also read about his wife and what is told to us about Abigail.
She was
Intelligent and beautiful. It's a good combination. So, yes, intelligent or I got discerning in mind, and both very good words to describe her. She's got good sense about her. She makes good decisions, and she's beautiful to boot. So this is the makings of a great wife, a great woman. And in contrast with Nabal, it's even more striking because what is he like? Yeah, harsh and evil in his ways. My translation says badly behaved, which I kind of like because it makes me think of a little kid who's badly behaved. And Nabal does act like a little kid in this. He does not have much self-control. He does not have much sense about him. His decisions are not good in this story. Mark?
Well, his name means fool,
Yeah.
and we're stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes you kind of wonder, how did he get his wealth? It was either an inheritance, or it was the only reason he probably was able to keep it because of his wife.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that, but a fool can't hold on to wealth. They don't know how.
Yeah, many a foolish man has been saved by a wise wife to rein him in and to stop him from all of this foolishness that's going on. And it would be very interesting to know other things that happened in their lives previously and how much that Abigail had really helped him. Yes.
I find his name kind of interesting in that I can't imagine a mother naming her child this. It is a pseudonym or something that, I just can't picture a mother naming a baby fool or stupid or.
Yeah, it might have been the name he came to be known by. It might have been the name that he was called behind his back more than to his face. That kind of thing did happen sometimes. There's nothing saying that was his name at birth or the name that people called him, when they were speaking directly to him. But, your reputation precedes you in a lot of situations. And he's known to be a fool. He's named fool. And as we'll see, his servants know who to go to when you need a good decision made. You don't go to Nabal. You go to Abigail. Scott?
I was just, not to disagree with Mark, Mark was a smart guy, but, and I think it's likely that's possible. But the other side of it is I've seen people that are wise in business, that are foolish in everything else, and it's funny how, the world can get away with a lot and
Yeah.
end up being very successful in the world, but really extremely foolish in their life, in all of their actions and all of their, especially spiritually, but,
Yeah.
they're harsh with people, but they get things done, stuff like that. So it could be maybe that side as well,
Yeah.
or or something, instead of just being, you guys may not be a complete idiot.
Yeah.
He just is very foolish in the way he thinks, because he's thinking very short-sighted about the wealth at the moment and all that stuff. You just can't live like that.
Yeah, that's quite a real possibility there, and certainly we've seen that kind of thing before. Diane?
Well, the Bible says be slow to speak, slow to anger, quick to hear. So anybody who is quick to respond without even thinking and just quick to anger are foolish people.
Yeah. And that's what we see out of Nabal for sure. Yeah, I think the foolishness on display in this story is unwarranted stinginess and lack of hospitality, and then speaking too quickly and being too harsh. Those two things do not preclude him from being successful at business. In fact, like Scott's saying, there are plenty of people who do quite well in business, in part because they are very stingy and they don't know much other than how to get money and hold on to it. And that's quite possible that's what was going on with Nabal here. He's able to expand these flocks and herds. He's able to do well for himself there. But nobody likes him, and he's not been a blessing to the people around him. He's not been a good employer to these servants. He's not been able to fulfill any real spiritual purpose for his family. I'd still call that man a fool, even if he's made a bunch of money and even if he has extensive flocks and herds. This that very well could be the answer here. Mark.
Yeah, I find it interesting you brought up Abraham and, Nabal's possible life the way he was having to live. Because I was thinking very much in the same terms, only I was thinking more about David. Although, because David is doing the same thing. He's just roaming around, and he's doing much like what Abraham would do, which is offer protection
Yes.
for whoever he was. And that's how he was very friendly. He obviously had a very good reputation because people would let them stay on their land and they would be protected by Abraham and his people.
Yeah.
The difference between Abraham and David, of course, is that Abraham had slaves and David just has a bunch of I don't want to call them miscreants, but they were unhappy people
Yeah.
in the land who attached themselves to David.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Malcontents, yeah.
Yeah, malcontents is a good word. I was thinking misfits, but malcontents is probably better. I read one commentator that said that David's offer here of protection to Nabal was like a mafia scheme of, we'll offer you protection. I think that's pretty cynical, but I have a hard time reading it that way. And this sort of arrangement has been seen before. It's a way of asking for hospitality, but also softening the social blow of it, right? Of, we're not just going to freeload off of you. We'll help protect you. There's all sorts of things that can come up with these shepherds who are scattered over a large area. People can come by and hurt them, steal the animals from them, attack. Having some armed people around that you are supporting for a time is going to give some protection, and I don't think we need to read that as a particularly cynical take.
Well, in the sermons, it sounds to me like in the servant's response to Abigail, that's what they were saying. It's like they didn't take anything from us while they were there, and they were a wall around us for protecting them. We had protection, so we were at ease, comforted.
Yes.
When they were here, and like I said, they didn't steal anything or take anything forcefully from us or anything.
Yeah. Go to the working man to see what the situation actually is and what is appreciated. They saw the benefit of this. Yeah, I like that. Nabal doesn't see the benefit of it at all because he looks like he's a little removed from what is happening out there in the fields. That happens sometimes with people who have a lot of the authority and the money and the position there, that they're not really in tune with what is going on the front lines, whatever the front lines is for their business or whatever they're head of. So before we even get to that point, though, David and his men have come into this territory, and likely they don't even immediately know that this is Nabal's territory. They're going to see the shepherds first. So not unusual to see shepherds scattered around with flocks and herds, and they have good interactions with them. As was said, when the shepherds later talk to Nabal, as Jeff was saying, that they say, they didn't harm us, they didn't take advantage of us, they didn't steal from us, they lived in harmony with us, and they were a protection to us, and they didn't look at us as something to be despoiled or to be taken. And that was before David likely knew that these shepherds are all connected to a wealthier man, and that there was somebody that might be worth impressing. So they've conducted themselves well, and probably from the conversations with those shepherds and shearers, they learned that Nabal is the one who's in control of this area. And so David sends 10 young men to him. And he says, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." So, David is asking for some hospitality. Again, this is a baseline duty in their culture at the time, that you need to be kind and generous to people who are passing through. That was your duty as an Israelite. That was your duty as somebody in this covenant with God. It was a golden rule kind of situation of it's what you would want if you were passing through a strange place. It's hard to be traveling in those days. It's hard to be between towns, to not have everything that you need. It's hard to sustain enough food and supplies for any group of any real size. And so a lot of people resorted to criminal activity in these. You basically become bandits. You steal what you need, and you become a great harm to the people around you. David and his men have not done that. And again, I will remind you that this is what you would expect out of a rebel force who's looking to destabilize the current regime. It would actually make a lot of sense for them politically to be bandits, to make people afraid to go and travel, to make people ask Saul, "Why can't you protect us? Why can't you keep us safe?" It's bringing Saul's poll numbers down, so to speak, if they can create chaos in the land. But David and his men, well, his men might, but David doesn't want to create chaos. And he's working on getting his men to understand that as well. And he's been able to lead them well because they don't create any chaos here with Nabal. They're not causing any problems. They're asking for the hospitality that they're owed as fellow Israelites. And David expects that this is going to be answered in the affirmative. We know Nabal is wealthy. We know that he is capable of giving this help. But what is his response? Yeah.
Well, he says many slaves these days are running away from their master, which I find interesting that he equates David and the men that are with him with slaves that belong to him.
Yeah. Doesn't have good things to say about David. You know, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants breaking away from their masters these days. I think he probably does know who David is, right? I mean, they literally sing songs about David in this land. I think he's probably heard of David. He just doesn't care.
Well, Abigail knows who he is. So
Yeah.
if Abigail knows who he is, Nabal knows.
Right, yeah. That seems pretty believable that he really would know. It's more that he doesn't care. And if David is on the run from Saul, and Nabal seems to have that idea, then he says he just equates David to a slave who's broken away from his master, and as a man with many servants under him, he doesn't want to support that kind of behavior. He cares about the current regime. He cares about peace. He cares about stability of social order. He's not going to do anything to help David. Mark?
Yeah, I think he's afraid of Saul.
Yeah.
Saul just had, I don't know how long before this, but he had the whole city of the priests.
Yeah.
And you can't not hear about that at some point, I would imagine. And it seems like he's being very sarcastic. Who's David?
Yeah.
You know, he's a nobody. And this reference of people leaving their masters. David and his family are on the run. They're gone. They're not subject to the king in his eyes, probably. And he's just really, I think he's trying to preserve his own life and his own mind. And is negating the fact that David's been helping, his people have been helping him for some time.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. Though I'll also note that Nabal doesn't seem real conflicted about this at all. He's not saying, I wish I could help you, but I'm afraid that if I do, there will be consequences. He's rude, he's sarcastic, he's harsh and angry. I'm not sure he's not thrilled with the idea that he doesn't have to help David. It's an easy excuse. So, Aaron?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, he doesn't want to help David, and this is a very convenient reason not to.
Yeah.
He just says, "Oh, David's a deserter."
Yeah.
But his true, I think, motivation comes out in the next verse, where he says, "Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shears and give it to people that I don't know?"
Yeah. Yes, it's pretty clear what the real motivation is here. Even if Nabal was trying to do an analysis of, okay, how safe is it for me to help David? He also would need to do an analysis of how safe is it for me to anger this group of armed men who are here on my land? You know, he could be a little bit more diplomatic about saying no if he was concerned just with safety. I don't think he's just concerned with safety, even if that probably does play a role in this, because he is rude and harsh with David. He doesn't care about the very likely immediate consequences of that decision, and he does reveal his motivations here, where there's so many of those personal pronouns in there. It's my bread and my water and my meat that I've killed for my shears. This is the attitude of a selfish man who does not want to be hospitable. And it's shameful for a person who should fear God and for a person even in that culture. Yeah, Gary.
You might say foolish.
Yeah, right. He's living up to his name. He's being foolish here. Lauren?
In addition to that, like his own servants call him scoundrel. When they speak with him, he uses really strong language. Like
Yeah.
he's completely unreasonable when they speak to him. But it's kind of going along with what we've been saying this whole time, that it's a well-known fact, his character's
Yeah, even his servants know what he is like. And again, you learn a lot about a person by how they treat people who are under them, or by how they treat people they perceive are under them. And his servants don't have a lot of respect for him. They know his character, they know his foolishness, and they even say so to Abigail. So David's men return and deliver this news to David that Nabal's been this harsh and rude. And what is David's response? Yeah. So David's offended, as he probably should be. This was offensive. He was mistreated. His response, though, does not have a whole lot of restraint to it. It's strap on your swords, we're going to war. Okay?
He doesn't like for people to mistreat his men.
Mm-hmm.
We have other examples of that.
Yeah.
He went to war with somebody because they mistreated some of his men. He doesn't like that.
Yeah. David he's got some reason to be angry. Like, I don't want to downplay that. He has real reason to be angry. Nabal absolutely provoked him, and Nabal absolutely sinned and mistreated him. He has done some great evil here, and David should be offended and he should be angered by it. Is the right solution to go to war against him? Probably not. Mark?
I don't know, because if it's unjust, it's murder,
Yeah.
not for lack of being.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. This is not David going up against God's enemies of the Philistines, or not a judgment from God that against these people. This is David seeking some vengeance, and this is a little out of character for him, but he is prepared to kill not even just Nabal. Does anybody think that if they all go, take up their swords and go attack Nabal, that Nabal's going to be the only one who's killed? There's going to be all of these shepherds and shearers, maybe Abigail, whoever else, that could easily become victims of this. This is a very dangerous situation where a lot of people could die. Someone had their hand up. Who was that? Okay.
Well, it's just, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
you know, he's gonna kill a lot of innocent people
Yeah.
because these other people weren't involved in this at all.
Right. And the punishment for lack of hospitality and rudeness isn't death. Let's just be clear on that, right? Like, it's not. It's wrong, but it is not worthy of death. And so even for Nabal, like, this would not be a good thing for David to go and do. Nevertheless, they take up their swords, they're ready to go to battle. 400 men go up with David, 200 remain with the baggage, with their supplies, to protect those, and they march on to attack Nabal and his men. So, seeing the crisis, one of the young men, one of these servants of Nabal, decides we've got to get some reason. Who does he go to for reason? Abigail. Because Abigail is the one you go to for reason in this family. I can't stress enough how important that is, that the people around Nabal and Abigail know that she is the one you go to for reason. You don't go to Nabal and say, Nabal, you don't realize what you've done. You've offended David so greatly that he's coming to fight against you. They don't believe that's going to do any good. He's just going to double down. He's just going to stay stubborn. You've got to go to Abigail. Abigail is the only one who might be able to fix this. And so he tells the story. David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So, yes, the servant confirms this story. He confirms that David and his men didn't do them any harm. He confirms that this is not some weird mafia scheme here, but that they really were a benefit to them. And that David and his men, they don't need to be at war with each other. There does not need to be any fighting. And so verse 17 says, Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. Again, I cannot stress enough how much they know that.
Just a side note, that what the report is that Nabal railed, and that basically means he was yelling and screaming when he delivered that message. You don't see that in the
Right.
text.
Yeah.
But that was the complete insult that he
Yeah.
delivered back to David in that sense.
Yeah. He was known to be a harsh and cruel and foolish man, and he acted like it here. He reacted in the way that a harsh and stingy man would react if he's asked to show hospitality. Just who do you think you are? You know, yelling and screaming at them. Jeff?
Just a thought, I mean, it doesn't say anything about it, but just a thought crossed my mind. Maybe, I mean, Nabal had all these servants and stuff like that. Maybe he thought he had enough himself to ward off any attacks or whatever, it's like, I'm not afraid of David, type of attitude,
Yeah, I think.
I mean, it's not that they were trading servants or fighting men or whatever, but he might have thought, I'm fine,
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of David.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably pretty true, that he didn't see any reason to fear David, didn't see, he's not afraid to be insulting because, well, if it comes down to a fight, so what? But, foolish and reckless and harsh men don't always consider that they might not win the fight, right? Think about that on the level of, people we know who just get in fist fights, get in physical altercations, right? I mean, are they usually analyzing ahead of time? Well, am I capable of winning this fight against this? No, they're prone to this lack of self-control, and they get involved in the fight because they can't keep themselves under control. And they can't stop themselves from behaving so angrily. That being said, I think Nabal has a pretty inflated view of himself and probably does believe David's not a threat. He doesn't consider that it's really going to come down to a fight, but even if it does, well, Nabal's a rich and powerful man, and he's got lots of servants. He's got thousands of animals. Nobody is really going to attack him, right? Well, David's not afraid to do that. And his men are trained for war by this point. They've successfully gone and fought there in Keilah to rescue that city. They've seen battle. These shepherds probably haven't seen that much battle. So this is probably not going to go that well for them, even if we're not sure how many of them there really were. Aaron?
And is David asking for food because it's a feast day, like a celebration to God? And him and his men don't have anything to participate?
Yeah, so that's playing into this, something we haven't really talked about. So it's asking for hospitality, asking for some supplies and for some food out of, first, probably general need. But the reason that's given, and the even more important reason, is it's a feast day. And it's supposed to be a day of celebration. We don't know which feast day this was, but a day of celebration and maybe remembrance, depending on which one. And a day when they're supposed to be celebrating and supposed to be feasting. And it's not a day of stinginess. It's not a day of not being willing to show hospitality. It's just an extra reason for the hospitality to be all the more important. And Nabal doesn't seem to care about any of that. And as we will see, it is not because he is not capable of providing quite a feast on this feast day, because he does. Leader?
Yeah, I think what is in the mind of David is he has done things which would help the neighbor, because he took care, he helped and he taking care of the cattle and everything. But it was just probably in his mind at least a little bit of kindness and consideration from it, because in the later part of the chapter you notice that David said, we have done so much for this person.
Yeah.
How come he's being
Yeah.
scoundrel as what the servants is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just kind of a mess all around. And they know Abigail's the only one who's going to be able to help. So what does Abigail do to try to ward off this fight? Yeah, leader.
He tries to cover up the rudeness of Nabal,
Yeah.
thinking probably that David would reconsider in time, and he did.
Yeah, David has been insulted and has been denied hospitality, and so Abigail tries to patch up that offense, tries to show kindness and show respect, and to bring some hospitality. So she's got kind words for him and a gift to offer in an attempt to undo this wrong that has been done. Notice again that she even does not go to her husband and say, look what you've done, and you drag him by the ear and make him apologize. She doesn't even attempt to get him to fix it, because she probably agrees with her, the servant here, who says he's such a worthless man that one can't go talk to him. Abigail doesn't attempt to go talk to him. She's got to fix the problem herself. So, I would like to think that if I did something foolish and was rude or made a mess of things, and Lauren knew about it, that she would come to me and would say, Danny, what are you doing? What was that all about? Go fix this. This is not a good thing. rather than going, well, he's a lost cause, I need to go fix it myself. Like, that's even worse, right? I might be a lost cause, but Lita.
I think we should bring this lesson to us. It is a lesson to us that, during the time of kind of in between whatever it is, person, not a Christian, somebody, the calmness, reciprocating with calmness and kindness and love, as to what Christ has told us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Lauren?
Abigail's response is so well thought out and respectful, and she, just tell how incredibly wise she is. She's not only trying to stop harm from being done, but she also talks to him like she knows he's the anointed. And she knows that it would be wrong for him to take vengeance in his own hand, which David ends up finding out. I mean, after hearing her, he agrees. He said, "Thank you for stopping me from doing such a thing." It's
Yeah.
right for me to do such a thing. It's just so incredibly powerful. I feel like the way that she falls on her knees right before him, right when she gets there, and she's not only thinking of herself and her household, she's thinking of him as well.
Yeah.
It's very powerful.
It is powerful. She is humble. She takes the blame on herself, which, she's really not the one to blame here. But she says, be mad at me and then let me fix it so that you have nothing to be mad about anymore. Go ahead.
Well, she has a good understanding of the will of God.
She does.
So she's, a faithful person. You can see that in her reasoning, both with how she deals with Nabal as well as how she deals with David.
Yeah.
And knowing that David should also have a good understanding of the will of God as a faithful man. She appeals to him on that, don't do what's wrong.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
eyes of God, to appease your anger.
Yeah.
When you're protected, she's telling David, you're protected, you have a surrounding of protection.
Yeah.
You don't need to lose what good things you have by taking revenge on somebody who's such a scoundrel.
Yeah. She has a really good way with words in this. I am just very impressed. She says, don't worry about Nabal. He's named Nabal for a reason. He's a fool. He's a worthless man. He's a scoundrel. And he does not behave himself well. So listen to what I'm telling you here. Take this gift. Take this, these kind words. Take this as an opportunity for you to not be guilty, to, get this blood guilt removed from you. You're going to be guilty of murder if you do this, and it's not worth it. He's not worth it. And I know that you're the Lord's anointed, and there's greater things ahead for you.
And also, she's married to this man.
Yeah.
And it can't be pleasant
No.
to be married to this person. As a matter of fact, it really has to be awful.
Yeah.
To be married to him. Yet she doesn't just hand him over to David or
Right.
whatever happens to David, who cares?
Yeah.
She's responding, as a wife, regardless of the behavior of her husband.
Yeah.
A wife who's faithful in the Lord.
Yeah. And it's really encouraging to see Abigail's decision-making there, her faith, her virtue that she has to be able to still carry out the will of God in what must have been a horrible situation for her. I can't imagine how hard that must have been to be married to a man that harsh and that foolish when she's the exact opposite. Scott?
It's really risky for her to do that too,
Yeah.
because she knows David's coming with swords and all that.
Yeah, she could be killed.
She must have understood, I guess, his character was so good. But I don't know that she just said, "Oh, I think I'm safe." I think she sacrificed herself, basically.
Yeah.
Threw herself out there. I think there's something to be said. She rode on a donkey. And
Yeah.
Kind of threw herself before David. There's maybe a little bit of an image of Christ there.
Yeah.
Just the way she was ready to give up her life, I think, to
Yeah.
help the situation go right. It was all about what was right, not what was. I don't think it was even self-preservation. It's not
Right.
like that. It's there, but
Yeah, she could have just fled if.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She. But
Yeah, it really is. And David is calmed down. He sees the wisdom of what she's saying. The offense has been patched over, and he's not going to come attack anymore. Just real quickly here, Abigail comes back. The feast is in full force, and they're having quite the time on this feast day. It's like the feast of a king, so there was enough to share, and he really chose not to. And he was so drunk that Abigail doesn't even bother to try to tell him what almost happened. Nabal and his men would have had no chance of fighting off David in this, drunken state. And so, in the morning light, as Nabal is nursing his hangover, she tells him what happened, and it says his heart died within him. He became as a stone. There's some speculation that maybe he, had a heart attack or had a stroke or had, something, or maybe just paralyzed with fear. And within 10 days, he dies. And it specifically says the Lord struck him. So this was a judgment from the Lord. And David didn't need to be involved in it. This was not David's place to do. And so David ends up marrying Abigail. We learn that Michal had been taken from him when he left, but Abigail becomes his wife. David was very impressed by her character, her faith. She's a worthy wife for him, and she goes on with him and leaves this place behind. He also ends up marrying Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of these places, there's political connection and influence for David to have wives from these places. So this is only going to help him in solidifying some power in the future. Okay, thank you, everyone. Next week, we will go into chapter 26, seeing how David spares Saul again.